An association of English gentlemen, therefore, was now formed, for the purpose of planting colonists on the American coasts, and of bringing the infidel savages to a knowledge of the Christian religion, to the true worship of God, to civilized life, and to a settled government. These men so associated King James I by patent, April 10, 1606, incorporated agreeably to their own choice into two companies under one and the same General Council of Government, wherein Messrs. Gates, Somers, Hakluyt, Wingfield, and their associates belonging to the city of London, and called the London Company, or First Colony of Virginia, formed one branch, and Thomas Hannum, Raleigh Gilbert, William Parker, and George Popham, and others of Plymouth in the county of Devon, or elsewhere who might associate, formed the other, and were called the Plymouth Company, or the Second Colony. The country granted extended from the 34th to the 45th degree of north latitude, and included all the islands within 100 miles of the coast, the whole being known by the general name of North and South Virginia. The first colony was permitted to begin a plantation at any place below the 41st degree of north latitude, and the second colony anywhere above the 38th degree. There was also provided a judicious precaution against any unhappy interference, for it was further stipulated that the colony which might be planted the last of the two should not begin a settlement within 100 miles of the other. The government ordained was this, viz., a General Council of Virginia, consisting of 13 men appointed by the Crown and residents in England, who were vested with a paramount jurisdiction, to be exercised according to such ordinances as should be given them under the Royal Sign Manual, and also two subordinate councils, each of 13 members living in America, named in the same way, were created for ruling and managing the interior affairs of each colony, agreeably to the King's instructions. This was a charter of rights as well as a patent of territory, though all sales of lands by the colonial councils were to be confirmed by the Crown to pass the fee. Every colonist and his children were to be citizens of the realm. The coinage of money was authorized, and importations of all useful chattels, armor, and furniture from the British dominions into the colonies were granted and allowed for 7 years duty-free. The colonists were moreover fully empowered to seize or expel intruders, and to exact taxes and duties for their own benefit. Such is the outline of this important patent, which, without any other boundaries than the parallels of latitude mentioned, embraced at the eastward most of the Acadian peninsula. Impatient to found a plantation upon these northern shores, Lord Popham, Sir Ferdinando Gorges, and other members of the Plymouth Company, or Second Colony, dispatched hither Captain Henry Chalons in August, with a ship carrying 31 men and 2 of Weymouth's captives, Manida and Ascomoit. Shortly afterwards, Thomas Hannum, one of the patentees, and Martin Pring, before mentioned, were sent with auxiliaries and fresh supplies to join Chalons in beginning a colony with the patent. But Chalons was taken November 10th by a Spanish fleet, carried to Spain, where his vessel was condemned, and Hannum did nothing more than to new-vamp and repeat the encouraging accounts of the country, and thereby enliven or perhaps invigorate the spirit of adventure. Next, under the auspicious patronage of the London Company, 3 ships with 100 colonists, including the members of a colonial council, sailed December 20th for the coasts of South Virginia, and in April 1607, a permanent settlement was originally effected, and at length established on James's River, and there the earliest administration of government was now commenced. A similar enterprise projected by the Plymouth Company was matured about the same time for settling another colony in North Virginia. In this branch of the corporation, the leaders were Lord John Popham, Chief Justice of England, and Sir Ferdinando Gorges, already become a conspicuous member. 100 emigrants, besides mariners, were engaged in the enterprise, and all necessary ordnance, utensils, and supplies were speedily procured. The outlines of the colonial government were drawn, and the several members of the council and the officers, who were all colonists, were designated by name. It was intended to have taken into employment 3 ships, and by no means to be outrivaled by those of the other company, but through disappointment in procuring one, the expedition was retarded, and 2 only were equipped and dispatched on the interesting expedition. The command of them was given to 2 of the patentees, George Popham, his lordship's brother, and Raleigh Gilbert, a nephew of Sir Walter Raleigh. They left Plymouth on the 31st of May, and according to their destination, steered directly for the North Virginia coast, where after a favorable passage, they arrived August 8th in safety. They first touched at Monhegan, and then proceeded to the mouth of a fair navigable river called by the natives Sagadoke. Although, according to some accounts, they first went ashore upon Araskahegan, or the Western Peninsula, yet it is believed they finally disembarked upon an island 200 rods eastward called Stage Island, supposed by them to be better situated for all the conveniences of trade with the natives and of navigation through the year. They probably landed on the north part of the island, which is level and easy of access, the southerly end being high, bleak, and rocky. They left the ships August the 11th, and assembling on shore returned public thanks to Almighty God and listened to a sermon adapted to the occasion. Their patent was then read, and their ordinances, laws, and instructions promulgated. The form of civil government, although aristocratic and simple, was evidently drafted for a great state. The colony council consisted of 8 members who were severally appointed to hold particular offices. George Popham, senior captain of the voyage, being president; Raleigh Gilbert, admiral; Edward Harlow, master of the ordnance; Robert Davis, sergeant major and commander of the militia; Ellis Best, marshal; John Scammon, secretary of the colony; James Davis, commander of the forts; and Gome Carew, searcher. These adventurous planters erected on the island some slight habitations or cottages, sunk 2 or 3 wells, and commenced an intercourse with the Indians. But they were soon convinced that the wells, owing to their contiguity to the sea, would never yield sweet water, that the island, containing only 8 or 10 eris, was too small for the permanent foundation of a colony, and that it was situated too far from other lands to form a free intercourse with the country. Therefore, they concluded to change their situation, and passing across the river to the western bank, they selected a pleasant and convenient site on the southeast side of a creek, near what is now called Atkins Bay, which stretches west into the land half a league and forms a peninsula at the southerly corner of the present Phippsburg. To this place they themselves removed, and during the autumn located and established a settlement, which was subsequently denominated the Sagadoke Colony. A commodious house and barn and a few slender cabins were built, and a fortification erected, which they named Fort St. George, from the Christian name of the president. But it was afterwards called Popham's Fort. A blockhouse, likewise with a storeroom, was erected and roughly finished, where the people kept their provisions and might, in case of danger, find protection. All practicable preparations being made for winter, the 2 ships, December 5th, sailed for England, leaving only 45 colonists, situated between an unbroken wilderness on the one hand and a waste of waters on the other, in an untried climate, and in the vicinity of savages. This plantation was undertaken by its patrons with a determination worthy of great and enterprising minds resolved upon the accomplishment of their purposes and sure of the greatest advantages to be derived from its establishment and prosperity. Through the friendly assistance of 2 natives, Chetwaros and De Hamida, sent hither in the ships by Georges and Popham, the adventurers received from the natives as a cordial welcome, and afterwards testimonies of particular respect and hospitality. Some of the Sagamores even offered to go with the English to the Bashaba, their great chief, whose residence they represented to be about Pemaquid. They signified to the president that he was a mighty prince, holding in obedience all the Sachems from Penobscot to Piscataqua, and that he expected all the strangers coming into his dominions to pay him their court, as a customary usage. Yielding at last to their importunities, the president proceeded along the coast eastward several leagues till obliged by adverse winds and inclement weather to return, equally to the disappointment of himself, the great chief, and the Sagamores. When the Bashaba was informed of what had taken place, he sent his own son to visit the president and make an arrangement with the company for opening a trade in furs and peltry. Such was the conduct of his frank and forbearing people, though several of them but a short time before and in this vicinity had been forcibly carried away to places unknown to their tribe. As an instance of manly generosity, an Indian named Amenquin, to reward the strangers for a straw hat and knife given him, stripped himself of a beaver mantle worth 50 or 60 shillings sterling and presented it to the president. The winter months were fraught with various trials. The season was extremely severe in England as well as in this country. Their habitations were poor, and they before spring suffered much from the cold. For though they had left a country in higher latitude than this, they were nevertheless strangers to an atmosphere equally keen and to unrelenting snow and ice through 5 months in succession. Still, they might have enjoyed security and peace in their fortification and lived comfortably upon the provisions brought from home, together with the fish and game taken by themselves or purchased of the Indians, had they met with no misfortunes and been guided at all times by the maxims of prudence and economy. but a traditional story is related and transmitted to us as coming from the old Indians, that at some time in the winter a quarrel fell out between the colonists and the natives, wherein one of the former was killed, and the rest all driven out of the fort, leaving their provisions, arms, and several barrels of powder. The Indians opened the casks, and being unacquainted with the peculiar properties of their contents, carelessly scattered the kernels, which, taking fire, blew to pieces the most of what was in the fort, and destroyed several of the Indians themselves. Struck half dead by the report and the disasters witnessed, they supposed the Great Spirit was angry with them for doing harm to the strangers, and made immediate proposals for a restoration of mutual friendship. Another tale, which comes to us in the form of a memoir, is also worthy to be told. Being collected at the fort to traffic, the Indians, it is said, were requested to draw a small mounted cannon by the drag ropes. They laid hold, and when in an attitude most exposed, it was discharged, giving them all a frightful shock, and actually killing and wounding some of them. Whether these stories have any connection or foundation in truth, we cannot at this distance of time ascertain with certainty, and we might especially wish the latter one for the credit of the colonists to be a fable. Yet both were believed to be true by the ancient and well-informed inhabitants on Sagadoke River. It is moreover certain that their storehouse took fire in midwinter, and was with a great part of their provisions reduced to ashes. As soon as the ships returned to England, Lord Popham persuaded his associates of the Plymouth Council to provide another immediate outfit and send them back without delay. But while waiting for a wind, the mariners of one ship heard of his lordship's sudden death, and the master of the other, before he sailed, was informed that Sir John, the brother of Raleigh Gilbert, was likewise dead, and thus became the bearers of these melancholy tidings to the plantation. Besides these deaths, happened that of George Popham, president of the colony, who had also lately deceased, and who was succeeded in that office by Gilbert, the official admiral. Being his brother's heir, he believed the estate required his immediate attention, and therefore he concluded to return home. The resolution at this crisis and the deaths of the two Pophams and Gilbert, three principal patrons of the enterprise, together with some additional disappointments, proved fatal to the colony. The climate was cold, the wilderness appeared to them impervious, the land wholly unyielding to the toils and arts of cultivation, and probably the Indians had become again unfriendly. Nay, one account represents that in consequence of the resentments of the natives occasioned by the gunpowder plot or some ill treatment, the emigrants were induced to re-embark for the sake of their own safety and durst not return. Having resolved to quit the country, whatever the cause might have been, they all entered with their effects on board the returning ships that brought them, and cheerfully departed, taking with them, as the only fruits of their winter's enterprise, several kinds of fur, a small vessel built by them, and some native products of the place. To Georges and others, the promoters and patrons of this colony, the return of the planters was altogether unexpected and extremely unwelcome. In vindication of their conduct, they framed excuses with what ingenuity they possessed, and though they had lost only one of their number by natural death, they told very unfavorable stories of the country, its climate, soil, and healthfulness, representing it to be an intolerably cold and sterile region, not inhabitable, they said, by our English nation. This colony, the first ever attempted to be established by the English in North Virginia, was planned and begun with the courage, zeal, and beneficence which do not fear to encounter difficulties or hazard expense. Its projectors and friends believed a colonial establishment, well organized and prosperous, would be the common resort and asylum of all adventurers to this country, and the means of promoting and spreading other settlements to a wide extent. But its untimely end, some further deaths, and additional discouragements gave a deadly check to the spirit of colonization for several years. Yet Sir Francis Popham, son of the late baronet, sent a ship annually into these waters for several years in anticipation of benefits from the fishery and fur trade, and possibly from his father's advancements, till overcome by discouragements and losses, he was obliged at last to give up the pursuit. Some adventurers may have met with better success, for it is confidently asserted that the coasts were never afterwards, for any considerable length of time, entirely deserted by Europeans until the country became settled.